I wanted to talk a little bit on the topic of privilege. Um, when I was at my local Quaker Zoom meeting this weekend, this topic came up during the discussion hour, and we've been doing kind of this monthly discussion about race that we sort of initiated as a consequence of the protests against racist police that started happening over the summer, and it's been a really good series of conversations. And this past Sunday, we were talking about race and privilege, and what one should do upon recognizing that one has privilege, which is a bit of an issue. There wasn't really a good consensus that seemed to emerge regarding, well, what do you do when you know that you have privilege? It definitely seems like you should be aware of it when you have privilege. For example, you grew up in a socioeconomic environment and family situation that allowed you to go to college or excel at school and have certain environmental conditions that were conducive to doing well at school, um, among many others, and to be aware of how those conditions led to your current station in life, what you were able to do, your own socioeconomic situation, and the job that you were able to have, all these sorts of issues. So that was clear. You need to be aware of it. Needs to be something that you ponder and you look at and you say, oh, well, somebody that maybe belongs to a different race than I do doesn't have that same set of privileges. And that's why they're in the situation that they're in. Um, they're in a disadvantaged situation compared to myself, and B, they're in that situation because of, not anything that either of us earned um, by any stretch of the imagination, but just things having to do with how we were born, the situations we were born into, and the assumptions that are happening culturally regarding people of the race that we belong to. These are just things that we have to be aware of. It's important. But of course, just being aware, I mean, if it just stops there and you don't do anything, it's kind of pointless. Like, are you really aware at all if that awareness doesn't somehow influence your future behavior? And, you know, at some point in some of the readings that we were doing, it seemed like perhaps there's a suggestion somewhere in the culture that you're supposed to disavow your privilege, like you're supposed to say, okay, sort of like renounce it. I say any privilege that I have that puts me in an elevated position over someone else on a playing field, I need to just do away with it, which is a choice that could be made. And maybe it seems like it's a little bit less, um, like there's less injustice there somehow if if one does that, and perhaps that's correct. Another person was saying that, well, if you have privilege and you don't use it, you're actually being uh, somehow unjust, because if there if someone who was unprivileged were to be given access to that same privilege that you have access to, you can guarantee that that person would use it to the fullest possible advantage to improve their life, which is faced with much hardship. So if you're not doing that, it's kind of like somehow unjust, because you're not you're sort of like wasting it almost. I guess that's related to like the whole starving children argument for why you should eat all the food on your plate, because there are children starving elsewhere. And it seems like there is some merit to that. However, it also seems like that can really enter into the territory of being greedy very easily too. Like, okay, because I'm given this privilege, well, I need to use all that privilege to help myself and not think about anybody else, and that's using my privilege. Well, it doesn't seem right either, because that's how we end up with people who don't even notice their privilege, and wind up doing things that exploit others who don't have privilege, and cause lots of problems, and create lots of hardship. And we don't want to be doing that. That's not just, and it can, of course, easily enter into the territory of racism. So what is the right choice to make in regard to this privilege? Another option that was suggested in some of the readings we were discussing is, well, you need to really advocate on behalf of the people who don't have the same sets of privileges that you do. Okay, you can use your privilege, but you've got to also, in addition to that, advocate on behalf of those who have less privilege. Somehow use your privileged position to be an advocate. And that to me seems like a good idea. Certainly better than the two extremes that I mentioned already. One is just completely disavowing it, and the other being just to use it, purely to its maximum advantage. Um, the problem with disavowing it is you can always find someone who's less privileged than you are. Anybody can find somebody who's less privileged than they are. So if we're all disavowing privileges, then pretty much we're just going to settle down into the least common denominator of the least possibly privileged person in the universe. And there are some pretty underprivileged people in the universe, and we're kind of being um, not really able to do anything. Like if I insist on living in such a way um, as an orphan in a third world country who's starving, well, okay, maybe that it seems more just, um, it's more fair to the orphan, but at the same time, if I'm starving, I'm not going to be able to do anything to help anybody else out or to help um, myself get out of that situation or anybody get out of the situation. So, that 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 fails. Um, and I guess that kind of brings me to the idea that I had about this, which is if we use our privilege in a way that benefits everyone rather than benefiting strictly ourselves, that can be a component of a just response to the privileged situation. If we say, okay, yes, I have this privilege, I have this, education that, my position in society, my privileged position, growing up, which I didn't earn, which was just handed to me. Um, I have that, and I'm going to use it in a way that benefits everyone, including the non privileged people, or maybe even weighted more towards the unprivileged people than towards the privileged people, such as myself. That can be a just response. Of course, it's necessary to make sure one's basic needs are fulfilled, because if one is hungry or exceedingly unsheltered or undernourished, then it becomes difficult for one to be effective. But if one tends to one's own needs to the extent that one's basic needs are fulfilled, and then from there uses that position of privilege to benefit others, including and perhaps focusing on those who are unprivileged, that can become a just way of using it. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about that. And thanks for listening to what I had to say.